The dust had barely settled on Main Street when Sarah Morrison stumbled into the town of Redemption, Texas, her worn traveling dress clinging to her swollen belly, and every door she knocked upon slammed shut the moment the women glimpsed her condition. It was the autumn of 1878, and the unforgiving judgment of a small frontier town could be deadlier than any rattlesnake hiding in the brush. Sarah had been traveling for 3 weeks straight, her feet blistered and bleeding through her tattered shoes, seeking refuge anywhere that would take her in. The father of her child, a smooth-talking gambler named William Hartley, had disappeared the moment she told him about the baby, leaving her alone in a world that showed no mercy to unwed mothers. The sun hung low in the October sky, casting long shadows across the dusty street as Sarah approached yet another establishment. The Golden Rose boarding house stood before her, its white paint peeling but still maintaining an air of respectability that made her heart leap with desperate hope. She climbed the wooden steps slowly, her hand resting protectively over her belly where the child kicked and rolled. The baby was due in just 2 months, maybe less, and she needed shelter before the harsh Texas winter arrived. Mrs. Helena Pritchard answered the door, her stern face framed by graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes traveled immediately to Sarah's midsection, and her expression hardened like cooling iron. "We do not house women of loose morals here," she said coldly. "This is a respectable establishment." "Please," Sarah begged, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "I have money. I can pay for a room. I just need a place to rest for the night." "The answer is no, Mrs." Pritchard stepped back to close the door. "You should have thought about your circumstances before engaging in sinful behavior. I will not have you corrupting the other guests with your presence." Sarah felt tears streaming down her dusty cheeks as the door shut firmly in her face. She turned away, her vision blurring as she descended the steps. This was the 7th place that had turned her away, and the sun was setting fast. The temperature would drop soon, and she had nowhere to go. Her legs trembled beneath her, weak from hunger and fatigue. She had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days, surviving only on the stale bread and dried meat she had rationed from her dwindling supplies. She made her way toward the edge of town, thinking perhaps she could find shelter in a barn or stable, somewhere the animals would not judge her for her mistakes. The main street was emptying as townspeople returned to their homes for supper, and the smell of cooking food made her stomach clench with hunger. She passed the general store, the blacksmith's shop, and the small white church that had also turned her away earlier that afternoon. The preacher had been kinder than most, offering her a brief prayer, but explaining that the church had no facilities for overnight guests, and that the congregation would never approve of housing an unwed mother. As she reached the outskirts of town, Sarah noticed a modest ranch house set back from the road, surrounded by a split-rail fence. Warm light glowed in the windows, and she could see horses in a nearby corral. A barn stood to one side, and for a moment she considered simply hiding there without asking permission. But something stopped her. She had been raised to be honest and forthright, and even in her desperate circumstances, she could not bring herself to trespass. She was about to continue walking when the front door of the house opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall and lean, dressed in typical cowboy attire, with worn denim pants, a blue cotton shirt, and a leather vest. A hat sat on his head, shadowing his face in the dying light. He stood there for a moment, clearly having noticed her standing by his fence, and then he walked toward her with long, purposeful strides. "Evening, miss," he called out as he approached. His voice was deep and carried easily across the quiet evening air. "You look lost. Can I help you with something?" Sarah quickly wiped at her tears, trying to compose herself, but she knew she must look a sight. Her dark blonde hair had escaped its pins and hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, and her condition was impossible to hide. "I apologize for disturbing you, sir," she managed to say. "I was just passing through." The man came closer and she could see his face more clearly now. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with strong features weathered by sun and wind, a firm jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes that seemed kind despite their intensity. He looked at her with concern rather than judgment, his gaze taking in her obvious exhaustion and distress. "You do not look like you are just passing through," he observed gently. "You look like you are about to collapse. When did you last eat?" Sarah opened her mouth to give a polite deflection, but her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if the man had not moved quickly to catch her arm, steadying her with a firm but gentle grip. "Easy now," he said. "Let me help you." "I am fine," she protested weakly, but even she did not believe the words. "No, miss, you are not fine. You are exhausted and clearly need help." He glanced toward the town behind her. "I saw you leave the boarding house. I assume Mrs. Pritchard turned you away?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The cowboy's jaw tightened, and something flickered in his eyes that might have been anger, though not directed at her. "That woman calls herself a Christian, but has no charity in her heart." He looked back at Sarah, his expression softening. "My name is James Tucker. I run this ranch, and I live here alone since my parents passed on. I have a spare room, and I can offer you a hot meal and a safe place to rest." "I could not possibly impose," Sarah began, but James held up a hand. "It is not an imposition. It is simply the right thing to do." He paused, then added, "I heard what you said to Mrs. Pritchard. I was in town and walking past when you knocked on her door. I heard her turn you away and saw you leave. I followed because I wanted to offer you help, but I did not want to approach you in the middle of town and cause you more embarrassment." Sarah felt fresh tears threatening. "You do not understand. I am not married. The baby I carry has no father who will claim him or her. No one in this town will want anything to do with me." "Then this town is full of hypocrites and fools," James said firmly. "A woman in your condition needs care and shelter, not judgment. The way I see it, you are someone in need, and I have the means to help. That is all that matters." He gestured toward his house. "Please, let me offer you a hot meal and a place to sleep tonight. You can decide what to do tomorrow after you have rested." Sarah looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of ulterior motive or false kindness, but she found only genuine concern. In her desperation, she had little choice but to trust him. "Thank you," she whispered. "I am Sarah Morrison, and I am grateful for your kindness, Mr. Tucker." "Call me James," he said with a small smile. "Come on, let me help you inside before you fall over." He offered his arm, and Sarah took it gratefully, leaning on his strength as they walked toward the house. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment, and the baby was kicking insistently, perhaps sensing her distress. James shortened his stride to match her slower pace, patient and steady as he guided her up the porch steps and into his home. The interior was simple but clean and well-maintained. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with a fire already burning that filled the space with welcome warmth. Comfortable furniture arranged around the hearth suggested this was a home, not just a place to sleep. Through a doorway, Sarah could see a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove and a table with 2 chairs. "Sit here by the fire," James said, leading her to a cushioned chair. "I will get you some water and then fix you something to eat. I have stew on the stove that should be ready soon." Sarah sank into the chair with a sigh of relief, her body finally able to rest after so many hours of walking. The warmth from the fire seeped into her aching muscles, and she closed her eyes for just a moment, feeling safer than she had in weeks. James returned quickly with a cup of cool water, which she drank gratefully, not realizing how thirsty she had been. He watched her with those steady eyes, then nodded. "I will be right back with some food. Do not try to get up. Just rest." He disappeared into the kitchen, and Sarah could hear him moving about, the clatter of dishes and the sound of a ladle stirring in a pot. The homey sounds made her throat tighten with emotion. She had grown up in a proper household in St. Louis, Missouri, with loving parents who had given her a good education and taught her to be a respectable young woman. But her father had lost everything in a bad business venture, and her mother had died of pneumonia the following winter. Her father, broken by grief and financial ruin, had passed away just 6 months later, leaving Sarah alone at the age of 21 with no family and no prospects. She had taken a position as a governess with a wealthy family, but the lady of the house had accused her of trying to seduce her husband based on nothing but paranoid jealousy, and Sarah had been dismissed without references. Desperate and alone, she had fallen for William Hartley's charming words and promises of marriage. He had been handsome and persuasive, telling her he was a successful businessman who traveled frequently. She had believed him when he said they would marry as soon as he returned from his next trip. Instead, she had discovered she was pregnant, and when she found William to tell him, he had been in the middle of a card game, in a saloon, drunk and laughing with other gamblers. He had denied knowing her, had called her terrible names, and had threatened her when she persisted. She had fled that town, hoping to find him elsewhere, but he had simply vanished, and she had been left to face the consequences alone. James returned with a bowl of steaming stew, thick with beef and vegetables, and a chunk of fresh bread. The smell made Sarah's mouth water, and she realized just how famished she truly was. "Thank you," she said, taking the bowl with trembling hands. "Take your time," James said, settling into the chair across from her with his own bowl. "There is plenty more if you want seconds." Sarah ate slowly, trying to mind her manners despite her hunger. The stew was delicious, hearty, and well-seasoned, and she could feel strength returning to her body with each bite. James ate in comfortable silence, not pressing her with questions or demanding explanations. His presence was calming, and she found herself relaxing in a way she had not been able to for months. When she had finished her bowl, James took it without a word and returned with a second helping. Sarah protested weakly, but he simply smiled. "You are eating for two. Do not worry about it." As she ate the second bowl more slowly, James finally spoke. "I do not mean to pry, but where were you heading when you came to Redemption?" Sarah set down her spoon, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly. "Nowhere in particular. I was just moving from town to town, hoping to find somewhere that would take me in. I have some money saved, enough for a few months of room and board, but no one will rent to me once they see my condition." "What about family? Friends?" "I have no one," Sarah admitted quietly. "My parents are both gone, and I was an only child. The father of my baby wants nothing to do with me. He denied even knowing me when I told him about the child." James's expression darkened. "What kind of man does that?" "A coward and a liar," Sarah said bitterly. "But I was foolish enough to believe his promises. This is my fault as much as his." "No," James said firmly. "He made promises he did not keep. He took advantage of you and then abandoned you. That is not your fault, Sarah. You made a mistake in trusting the wrong person, but that does not make you a bad person or deserving of the treatment you have received." Sarah felt tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of relief. "You are the first person in months who has not looked at me like I am something dirty and shameful." "Then everyone else is wrong," James said simply. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression earnest. "I meant what I said outside. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. I have a spare bedroom that you can use, and you can rest and regain your strength. When the baby comes, I will make sure you have whatever help you need." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Sarah asked, searching his face. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." James was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the fire. "My mother was a good woman who taught me that kindness and compassion matter more than following rules just for the sake of rules. She used to say that Jesus spent his time with sinners and outcasts, not with the self-righteous and proud. I am not saying you are a sinner," he added quickly, looking back at her. "I am just saying that if my mother were alive, she would have been the first person to offer you help, and she would have been ashamed of me if I did anything less." Sarah felt her heart swell with gratitude, and something else she could not quite name. "Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful woman." "She was," James agreed with a sad smile. "She passed away 3 years ago from a fever. My father followed her 6 months later. The doctor said it was his heart, but I think he just could not bear to live without her. They loved each other deeply." "I am sorry for your loss," Sarah said softly. "Thank you." James stood and collected their empty bowls. "Now, you look like you are about to fall asleep in that chair. Let me show you to the spare room so you can get some proper rest." He led her down a short hallway to a small but comfortable bedroom. The bed was made up with clean linens, and there was a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window with simple curtains. It was modest, but felt like luxury to Sarah, after sleeping on the ground or in rough accommodations for so long. "I will bring you some water for washing," James said. "The privy is out back, just past the porch. If you need anything during the night, my room is just across the hall. Do not hesitate to wake me if you need help." "Thank you, James," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I do not know how I can ever repay your kindness." "You do not need to repay anything," he said gently. "Just rest and take care of yourself and that baby. That is all I ask." He left her alone, returning a moment later with a pitcher of fresh water and a clean towel. After he had gone, Sarah washed her face and hands, marveling at the simple pleasure of warm water and soap. She removed her dusty dress and shoes, hanging the dress over the chair to air out, and climbed into bed in her undergarments. The mattress was soft and comfortable, the blankets warm and clean-smelling. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. As she lay in the darkness, her hand resting on her belly where the baby moved, Sarah found herself thinking about James Tucker. He was unlike any man she had ever met. Most men would have taken advantage of her vulnerability or made demands in exchange for their help. But James had offered assistance with no strings attached, out of simple human decency. His kindness made her ache with gratitude, and something more, something she was afraid to name because she had been hurt so badly before. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, sleeping more soundly than she had in months. Morning light filtered through the curtains, and Sarah woke slowly, disoriented for a moment, before remembering where she was. The baby was moving, stretching and kicking, and she smiled despite everything. Whatever mistakes she had made, this child was innocent and deserved love and care. She would do everything in her power to give her baby a good life, even if she had to do it alone. She rose carefully, her body stiff and sore from all the walking she had done, and dressed in her worn traveling dress. It was the only proper dress she had, and it showed every mile of her journey. She tidied the bed and then made her way to the kitchen, following the smell of coffee and bacon. James was at the stove, cooking breakfast, and he turned with a smile when she entered. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in ages," Sarah admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "You are welcome," he gestured to the table. "Sit down. Breakfast will be ready in a moment." Sarah sat, watching him work. He moved with easy efficiency, clearly comfortable in the kitchen. Soon he set a plate before her, with eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits, along with a cup of milk. "I figured milk would be better for you than coffee right now," he said. They ate together, and Sarah found herself relaxing in his presence. James asked her a few questions about her journey, and she told him an edited version of her story, leaving out the most painful details. He listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never making her feel ashamed or defensive. After breakfast, James insisted on cleaning up, while Sarah rested. "You need to take it easy," he said when she protested. "You have been through a lot, and you need to rebuild your strength." As the morning progressed, Sarah found herself exploring the house a bit, careful not to intrude on James's privacy, but curious about the man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. The house was clean and well organized, with photographs on the mantel showing a handsome older couple she assumed were his parents. There were books on a shelf, mostly practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry, but also a few novels and a well-worn Bible. James came in from outside, having been tending to his horses, and found her looking at the photographs. "Those are my parents," he said, coming to stand beside her. "That picture was taken on their 20th wedding anniversary, about 5 years ago." "They look happy," Sarah observed. They were. James picked up the frame, studying the image. "My father built this ranch from nothing, and my mother made it a home. They worked hard, but they always made time for each other. I want what they had someday." "Have you never married?" Sarah asked, then immediately felt embarrassed. "I am sorry. That is too personal a question." "It is all right," James said, setting the photograph back on the mantel. "I came close once, about 4 years ago. Her name was Elizabeth, and we were engaged to be married. But she met someone else, someone with more money and prospects, and she broke off our engagement. It hurt at the time, but looking back, I think it was for the best. If she could leave me so easily, then maybe we were not meant to be together." "I am sorry," Sarah said softly. "That must have been painful." James shrugged. "It was, but I got over it. I threw myself into building up this ranch, and I have done well for myself. I have a good herd of cattle, some fine horses, and enough income to live comfortably. I always figured the right woman would come along eventually, someone who wanted the same kind of life I do." Sarah felt a flutter in her chest at his words, but she pushed it aside. She was in no position to think about romance or relationships. She was pregnant with another man's child, homeless and desperate. James was being kind to her out of charity, nothing more. She would be a fool to read anything else into it. Over the next few days, Sarah settled into a routine at James's ranch. He insisted she stay as long as she needed, and she gratefully accepted, knowing she had few other options. She helped around the house as much as her condition allowed, cooking meals and doing light cleaning, wanting to earn her keep, even though James told her it was not necessary. James was gone much of the day, working with his cattle and horses, but he always returned for meals, and they fell into an easy companionship. They talked about many things during those meals, sharing stories from their pasts and discussing everything from books to politics to the changing landscape of the West. Sarah found herself looking forward to these conversations, delighting in James's dry sense of humor and thoughtful observations. She also found herself noticing things about him that made her heart beat a little faster. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands as he worked, the gentle patience he showed with his animals. He was kind and decent in a way that made her previous attraction to William seem shallow and foolish in comparison. William had been all flash and charm, with no substance beneath. James was the opposite, a man of quiet strength and genuine character. But she reminded herself constantly that she had no right to these feelings. She was a charity case, a woman pregnant with another man's child, and James was simply being a good Samaritan. To imagine anything more would be presumptuous and foolish. One afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Sarah was in the kitchen making bread when she heard a horse approach. She looked out the window and saw a woman riding up to the house, dressed in a fine riding habit that spoke of wealth and position. The woman dismounted gracefully and tied her horse to the rail, then walked up to the door with confident strides. Sarah wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and went to answer the knock, feeling suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. The woman at the door was beautiful, with auburn hair styled elegantly and clear blue eyes that assessed Sarah with open curiosity and a hint of disapproval. "Good afternoon," the woman said coolly. "I am looking for James Tucker. Is he at home?" "He is out working with the cattle," Sarah replied. "He should return in an hour or so. May I give him a message?" The woman's eyes traveled pointedly to Sarah's swollen belly, and her expression hardened. "And who might you be?" "I am Sarah Morrison. I am staying here temporarily." "I see." The woman's tone suggested she saw entirely too much. "How convenient for you. I am Elizabeth Chambers. Perhaps James has mentioned me. We were engaged once." Sarah felt her stomach drop. This was the woman who had broken James's heart. "He mentioned you," she said carefully. "I am sure he did," Elizabeth said with a brittle smile. "I suppose I should not be surprised that he has taken in a stray. He always did have a soft heart. Though I must say, this is quite bold of you, living alone with him unchaperoned and in your condition. The whole town is talking about it." Sarah felt her cheeks burn. "James has been nothing but a gentleman. He offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to go." "How noble of him," Elizabeth said sarcastically, "and I am sure you are very grateful for his charity. But you should know that people are making assumptions about the two of you, and not charitable ones. It would be a shame if his reputation were tarnished because of your presence here." "If people are making assumptions, that is their problem," Sarah said, lifting her chin despite her embarrassment. "James knows the truth, and so do I. That is what matters." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "You are awfully defensive for someone who is just temporarily staying here. Have you developed feelings for him? Do you think that because he has shown you kindness, he might want to take on another man's bastard and make you his wife?" The cruel words struck Sarah like a physical blow, all the more painful because they echoed her own secret fears and hopes. "That is enough," she said, her voice shaking. "You should go." "I came here to talk to James about resuming our relationship," Elizabeth said coldly. "My husband died 6 months ago, and I have been thinking about what I gave up when I broke our engagement. James and I were good together once, and we could be again. But I will not compete with some desperate woman who has trapped him with sympathy and obligation." "You do not need to compete with anyone," Sarah said, though the words tasted bitter. "James is free to make his own choices. If he wants to resume a relationship with you, that is his decision." "I am glad you understand," Elizabeth said smugly. "When he returns, please tell him I called. I will be at the hotel in town if he wishes to speak with me." She turned and walked back to her horse, mounting with practiced ease and riding away without a backward glance. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding and her eyes stinging with tears. Elizabeth's words had cut deeply, not because they were necessarily false, but because they forced Sarah to confront feelings she had been trying to deny. She had developed feelings for James, more than feelings. She was falling in love with him, had been since almost the first moment he had shown her kindness, and it was hopeless and foolish because what could she offer him? She was carrying another man's child, had no money or prospects, and would be entirely dependent on his charity for months to come. Elizabeth was right. She was desperate and pathetic, and James deserved better than to be trapped by obligation and sympathy into caring for her. When James returned an hour later, he found Sarah in the kitchen, her eyes red from crying, though she had tried to hide it. He immediately noticed something was wrong. "Sarah, what happened? Are you all right? Is it the baby?" "The baby is fine," she said, not meeting his eyes. "You had a visitor while you were gone. Elizabeth Chambers came by. She said to tell you she is staying at the hotel if you wish to speak with her." James frowned. "Elizabeth came here? What did she want?" "She said she wants to talk to you about resuming your relationship," Sarah said, forcing the words out. "She is a widow now, and she wants a second chance with you." James was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah felt her heart breaking, knowing he must be considering it. Elizabeth was beautiful and sophisticated, from his same social class and world. Of course he would want her back. "What did she say to you?" James asked quietly. "Because I can tell something upset you." "It does not matter," Sarah said, trying to hold herself together. "What matters is that you have a chance to be with someone you cared about, someone appropriate for you. You should go see her. Sarah, look at me." James's voice was gentle but firm. When she reluctantly met his eyes, she saw concern and something else she could not quite identify. "Tell me what Elizabeth said to you." "She told me the truth," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "That I am a desperate woman living off your charity, that people in town are talking about us, and that I should not delude myself into thinking you might have feelings for me just because you have been kind." James's expression darkened with anger, though Sarah could tell it was not directed at her. "That woman has no right to speak to you that way. She does not know anything about you or about what is between us." "But she is right," Sarah said miserably. "I am taking advantage of your kindness. You have given me shelter and food and asked for nothing in return, and I have been selfish enough to stay and let myself develop feelings I have no business having. You deserve to be with someone like Elizabeth, someone who can give you a proper life and family, not someone who comes to you already carrying another man's child." "Stop," James said firmly. He crossed the room to her, his hands gently grasping her shoulders. "Sarah, please stop talking about yourself that way. You are not taking advantage of anything. I offered you shelter because I wanted to help you, and you have stayed because you needed help. There is nothing wrong or shameful about that." "But Elizabeth said—" "I do not care what Elizabeth said. She left me for a richer man and broke my heart. And now that she is widowed, she thinks she can just come back and pick up where we left off. I do not want her, Sarah. I have not wanted her for a long time." Sarah looked up at him, her heart pounding. "You do not?" "No." James's thumbs rubbed gentle circles on her shoulders. "When Elizabeth left me, I thought my world was ending, but I realized after she was gone that what I felt for her was not real love. It was infatuation and the idea of what we could have together. We did not truly know each other, did not share the same values or dreams. She wanted wealth and status. I just wanted a partner who would build a life with me." "James, I cannot be that partner," Sarah said desperately. "I am pregnant with another man's child. I have nothing to offer you." "You have everything to offer me," James said, and the intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "Sarah, over these past weeks, I have gotten to know you. I have seen your strength, your kindness, your intelligence, and your humor. I have loved talking with you and sharing meals with you. I have loved having you in my home. And yes, I know you are carrying a child, but that child is a part of you, and I would be honored to help you raise him or her, if you would let me." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "You cannot mean that. You barely know me." "I know enough," James said. "I know you are a good person who made a mistake in trusting the wrong man. I know you are brave and resourceful to have traveled so far alone in your condition. I know you are loving and protective toward your baby. And I know that I have been falling in love with you since the first night you stayed here." "James," Sarah whispered, her heart soaring and breaking at the same time. "I am falling in love with you too, but I am so afraid. What if you regret this? What if you come to resent me and the baby? I could not bear it if you came to hate us." "That will never happen," James said with absolute certainty. "Sarah, I have thought about this carefully. I would not say these things if I did not mean them with my whole heart. I want you to stay here, not as a temporary guest, but as my wife, if you will have me. I want to raise your baby as my own child, to give him or her my name and my love. I want to build a life with you, the kind of life my parents had, full of love and partnership and shared dreams. Sarah could barely breathe. Are you proposing to me? Yes, James said simply. I know it is fast, and I know we have not known each other long. But I also know my own heart, and I know I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me, Sarah? She looked into his eyes and saw only honesty and love. This was nothing like William's smooth lies and false promises. This was real, offered by a man of genuine character who knew exactly what he was asking for and what he was offering. And she knew, with sudden clarity, that she loved him too. Not because he had rescued her or offered her shelter, but because of who he was. He was kind and strong, thoughtful and patient, with a dry sense of humor that made her laugh and a gentle touch that made her feel cherished. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, James. He smiled, a brilliant expression of joy that transformed his face, and then he pulled her gently into his arms, careful of her belly. She rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart, and felt safe and loved for the first time since her parents had died. We will do this properly, James said after a long moment. I will go into town tomorrow and speak to the preacher. We can be married as soon as he can arrange it, and I do not care what anyone in that town thinks or says. You are going to be my wife, and anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me. Sarah laughed through her tears. What about Elizabeth? She will be furious. Elizabeth made her choice 4 years ago, James said firmly. I have made mine now, and I have never been more certain of anything. They stood together in the kitchen, holding each other as the afternoon light faded into evening. Sarah felt the baby kick, and James pulled back slightly, looking down at her belly with wonder. May I? He asked. She nodded, and he placed his hand gently on her stomach. The baby kicked again, as if responding to his touch, and James laughed with delight. Hello, little one, he said softly. I am going to be your father, and I promise to love you and protect you always. Sarah felt her heart overflow. This was what she had dreamed of, what she had hoped for, without daring to believe it could really happen. A man who would love not just her, but her child, who would give them a home and a family. That night, they sat together by the fire, making plans for their future. James was practical, discussing what needed to be done to prepare for the wedding and the baby's arrival. They would need to set up a nursery, purchase supplies, and make sure Sarah had proper medical care when her time came. But he also spoke of dreams, of expanding the ranch, of the life they would build together, of the family they would raise. I want our children to grow up knowing they are loved, James said, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. This baby, and any others we might have, they will all be raised with the same love and care. There will be no difference in my mind between the child you carry and any children we create together. You really mean that, Sarah said, still marveling at his generosity of spirit. I do, James confirmed. This baby deserves a father who will love them, and I will be that father. The man who abandoned you and this child is a fool, and I am grateful for his foolishness because it brought you to me. The next morning, James rode into town to speak with the preacher. Sarah waited anxiously at the ranch, wondering how the conversation would go. The preacher had been kind but firm in turning her away before. Would he be willing to marry them, or would he try to talk James out of marrying a fallen woman? James returned several hours later with a determined expression. The preacher agreed to marry us, he said. It took some convincing, and he felt obliged to give me a lengthy speech about the responsibilities I was taking on. But in the end, he agreed. We can be married this coming Sunday. That is only 5 days away, Sarah said, feeling both excited and nervous. I know. Is that too soon for you? We can wait if you want more time. No, Sarah said quickly. I do not want to wait. I just worry that you are rushing into this without thinking it through properly. James took her hands in his. Sarah, I have thought of nothing else for days. I want to marry you as soon as possible, not just to give you and the baby my protection and name, but because I love you and I do not want to wait to start our life together. Those 5 days passed in a blur of preparation. James rode into town and purchased fabric for a new dress for Sarah, a soft blue calico that would accommodate her pregnancy. She spent her days sewing the dress with hands that trembled with anticipation and hope. James cleaned the house from top to bottom and bought supplies for a small celebration after the ceremony. Word spread through the town about the upcoming wedding, and reactions were mixed. Some people were scandalized, insisting that James was making a terrible mistake. Others, particularly some of the older women who had known his mother, expressed quiet approval, saying that James was doing the right thing and showing true Christian charity. Elizabeth Chambers, upon hearing the news, left town in a fury without speaking to James again. On Sunday morning, Sarah dressed in her new blue dress, her hair brushed and pinned in a simple but neat style. She looked at herself in the small mirror in her room and saw a woman transformed. The exhaustion and desperation that had marked her face when she arrived in redemption were gone, replaced by hope and happiness. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. "Your father is a good man," she whispered to her unborn child. "The best man I have ever known. We are so lucky to have found him." James was waiting for her in the main room, dressed in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. He looked nervous and excited. And when he saw Sarah, his face lit up with such obvious love and admiration that she felt tears prick her eyes. "You look beautiful," he said, offering her his arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "So do you." They rode together into town in James's wagon, sitting close together on the bench seat. As they approached the church, Sarah could see a small group of people gathered outside. Her stomach tightened with nervousness, but James squeezed her hand reassuringly. The preacher met them at the door, his expression kind but serious. "James, Sarah, are you both certain you wish to proceed with this marriage? This is a serious commitment you are making." "We are certain," James said firmly. "We love each other, and we want to build a life together." "Then let us begin," the preacher said. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. The preacher spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about the commitment they were making to each other, and about the importance of forgiveness and love. When it came time for the vows, James looked into Sarah's eyes and spoke his promises with such conviction that she felt her heart might burst. "I, James Tucker, take you, Sarah Morrison, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as we both shall live. I promise to be a father to your child, and to raise them with all the love and care I would give my own flesh and blood. I promise to be faithful to you and to build a life with you that honors the love we share." Sarah spoke her vows through happy tears. "I, Sarah Morrison, take you, James Tucker, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as we both shall live. I promise to be a faithful and loving wife, to stand by your side through whatever challenges we face, and to build a life with you that is full of love and happiness." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and James kissed Sarah gently, his hands cradling her face with such tenderness that she felt tears stream down her cheeks. The small group of people who had attended applauded politely, and Sarah was surprised to see several friendly faces among them. Not everyone in Redemption was judgmental and cruel. Some people, it seemed, still believed in kindness and second chances. After the ceremony, James and Sarah returned to the ranch, which was now officially their home together. James had prepared a special meal, and they ate together at the table, talking and laughing, marveling at the fact that they were now married. That night, James was patient and gentle, understanding that Sarah's advanced pregnancy made intimacy complicated. He held her in his arms, stroking her hair, and speaking softly about the future they would share. "I am so happy you are my wife," he murmured. "I never thought I would feel this way about anyone, but you have changed everything for me." "You have changed everything for me too," Sarah said, her hand entwined with his over her belly. "You saved my life, James. You gave me hope when I had none. I will love you for that, until the day I die." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Sarah's life. She and James settled into married life with surprising ease, finding joy in the simple routines of daily living. They worked together around the ranch, with Sarah doing what she could as her pregnancy advanced and James taking on the heavier tasks. In the evenings, they sat together by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking, sharing their thoughts and dreams. As Sarah's due date approached, James became increasingly protective and attentive. He rode into town and brought back the local midwife, Mrs. Abigail Thompson, to meet Sarah and discuss preparations for the birth. Mrs. Thompson was a round, cheerful woman in her 50s, with decades of experience delivering babies, and she immediately put Sarah at ease. "You are healthy and strong," Mrs. Thompson said after examining Sarah. "The baby is positioned well, and I do not foresee any complications. When your time comes, send James to fetch me, and I will come immediately." "Thank you," Sarah said gratefully. "I have been nervous about the birth." "That is natural, especially for a first baby," Mrs. Thompson said kindly. "But you have a good husband who will take care of you, and I will be there to help. You will do just fine." The baby came on a cold December night, 6 weeks after Sarah and James had married. Sarah woke just after midnight with the first pangs of labor, and James immediately rode through the darkness to fetch Mrs. Thompson. The midwife arrived quickly, and James paced anxiously in the main room while Mrs. Thompson attended to Sarah in the bedroom. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Sarah cried out in pain more than once, and each time James had to be restrained from bursting into the room. Mrs. Thompson finally allowed him in, and he sat by Sarah's side, holding her hand and speaking words of encouragement. "You are doing so well," he murmured, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "You are so strong and brave, just a little longer." Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, the baby was born. The sharp cry of a newborn filled the house, and Sarah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but relieved. Mrs. Thompson cleaned the baby and wrapped them in a soft blanket, then turned with a smile. "Congratulations, you have a son." She placed the baby in Sarah's arms, and Sarah looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her child. He had dark hair and eyes that would likely lighten as he grew, and he looked up at her with an unfocused but somehow knowing gaze. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mother, and I love you so much." James leaned over, looking at the baby with wonder and tears in his eyes. "He is beautiful," he said hoarsely. "Absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Sarah asked. James nodded, and Sarah carefully transferred the baby into his arms. James held the infant with surprising confidence, cradling him gently and speaking softly. "Hello, son. I am your father, and I promise to love you and protect you always. You are my boy now, and I will never let anyone tell you otherwise." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face at the sight of James holding her son with such love and tenderness. This was the family she had dreamed of, the life she had thought she would never have. "What should we name him?" James asked, looking up at Sarah. They had discussed names over the past weeks, and Sarah had a suggestion. "What was your father's name?" "Samuel," James said. "Samuel Henry Tucker." "Then let us name him Samuel," Sarah said, "after your father. So he carries on the Tucker family name and legacy." James's face lit up with emotion. "Samuel Tucker, I like that. My parents would have been so proud." Mrs. Thompson finished cleaning up and gave Sarah instructions for caring for the baby. "Get as much rest as you can," she advised. "The first few weeks are exhausting, but you will settle into a rhythm. And James, you will need to help your wife as much as possible. This is a partnership." "I intend to," James assured her. Over the following weeks, James proved himself to be a devoted father and husband. He helped with Samuel in the night when the baby woke crying, changing diapers and bringing him to Sarah for feeding. He took over all the household chores, insisting that Sarah rest and recover her strength. He marveled at every little thing Samuel did, from his tiny yawns to the way he gripped James's finger with his small hand. "He is perfect," James would say repeatedly, holding Samuel and rocking him gently. "Absolutely perfect." Sarah watched them together and felt her heart swell with love. James had been true to his word. He loved Samuel completely, with no reservation or hesitation. To him, Samuel was his son in every way that mattered. As winter gave way to spring, life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Samuel grew strong and healthy, developing a personality that delighted both his parents. He was a happy baby who smiled easily and rarely fussed, and he seemed to recognize James's voice, turning toward him whenever he spoke. One warm spring afternoon, Sarah was outside, hanging laundry while James worked in the nearby corral with a young horse he was training. Samuel was sleeping in a basket in the shade, and Sarah found herself simply grateful for the peaceful moment. She thought back to that desperate night when she had arrived in redemption, rejected and alone, and marveled at how much her life had changed. James finished with the horse and walked over to her, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hat pushed back on his head. "Need any help?" "I am almost finished," Sarah said, hanging up the last shirt. "How is the new horse coming along?" "He is a quick learner," James said. "I think he'll make a fine saddle horse once he is fully trained." He glanced at the sleeping baby and smiled. "Samuel is out like a light." "He had a big morning," Sarah said with a laugh. "He discovered his toes and was fascinated by them for a good half hour." James chuckled and pulled Sarah into his arms, kissing her softly. "I love you," he said. "I love our life together, and I love our son. Thank you for saying yes to marrying me." "Thank you for asking," Sarah said, resting her head against his chest. "Thank you for seeing past my circumstances to who I really am. Thank you for loving Samuel as your own. You have given us everything, James." "You have given me everything too," James said. "A family, a purpose, a reason to come home every day with a smile on my face. I could not imagine my life without you and Samuel now." They stood together in the spring sunshine, holding each other, while their son slept peacefully nearby. Life on a Texas ranch was hard work, but it was also full of simple joys and deep satisfaction. Sarah had found a home, not just in a place but in a person, and she knew that whatever challenges they faced in the future, they would face them together. As the months passed, Samuel continued to grow and thrive. He was an active, curious child who seemed determined to explore every corner of the ranch. James built a small pen where Samuel could play safely while they worked, and the baby would sit there contentedly, playing with wooden toys James had carved, or watching the chickens scratch in the dirt nearby. When Samuel was about 8 months old, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Sarah was in the house preparing lunch when she heard the horse approach, and she looked out the window with curiosity. The rider was a well-dressed man on a fine horse, and something about him made Sarah's blood run cold even before she could see his face clearly. James came out of the barn to greet the stranger, and Sarah watched anxiously from the window. The two men spoke for a few minutes, and she could see James's posture becoming increasingly tense and defensive. Finally, James pointed toward the house, and the stranger dismounted and tied his horse to the rail. Sarah's heart was pounding as she watched James escort the stranger to the house. When they came through the door, she saw the stranger's face clearly for the first time, and her worst fears were confirmed. It was William Hartley, the father of her child, the man who had abandoned her and denied knowing her. William looked prosperous and confident, his clothes expensive and his manner easy. His eyes swept the room and landed on Sarah, and he smiled as if they were old friends meeting by chance. "Sarah, it has been a while." "What are you doing here?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking with anger and fear. She instinctively moved toward the bedroom, where Samuel was napping, as if to protect him from this man's presence. "I heard through the grapevine that you had married and settled in Redemption," William said smoothly. "I wanted to see how you were doing and to meet my child." "You have no right," James said coldly. "You abandoned Sarah when she needed you most. You denied knowing her and called her terrible names. You have no claim on her or her child." "Legally, I am the father," William said, his smile fading. "I could make things very difficult if I chose to." "What do you want?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. William's expression shifted, becoming calculating. "I have been thinking about my situation. I never married, and I realize now that having a son could be beneficial to me. I am willing to acknowledge him as mine and to provide financial support. In return, I would want him to live with me for at least part of the year so I can raise him properly." "Absolutely not," James said immediately. "Samuel is my son. He bears my name, he lives in my home, and I am raising him. You gave up any rights you had when you abandoned Sarah." "The law may see things differently," William said with a shrug. "I am his biological father, and I can prove it. If I take this to a judge, I could very well be granted custody rights." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. The thought of William taking Samuel, of her baby being raised by this cold, selfish man, was unbearable. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Please do not do this. Samuel does not even know you. You would be taking him away from the only father he has ever known, the only home he has ever had. How can you be so cruel?" "I am not being cruel," William said, though there was no warmth in his voice. "I am asserting my rights as a father. Surely you can understand that." "You are not his father," James said flatly. "A father is someone who loves and cares for a child, who is there for every moment of their life, who makes sacrifices for their well-being. I am Samuel's father. You are just a man who contributed to his conception and then walked away." William's eyes narrowed. "I can see this is going to be difficult. Perhaps we can come to some arrangement. I am willing to sign away my rights permanently if you make it worth my while financially." The words hung in the air, and Sarah realized with disgust what William really wanted. He did not care about Samuel at all. He saw an opportunity to extort money from them, to take advantage of their fear and love for their child. "How much do you want?" James asked through gritted teeth. William named a sum that was substantial, more than a year's earnings from the ranch. Sarah saw James's jaw clench, but he nodded slowly. "I will need time to raise that amount." "I can give you 2 weeks," William said. "I will be staying at the hotel in town. If I do not hear from you within that time with the money, I will go to a judge and petition for custody rights." He tipped his hat mockingly. "It was a pleasure seeing you again, Sarah. Your son is a lucky boy to have such devoted parents. Let us hope they love him enough to pay for the privilege of keeping him." After William left, Sarah collapsed into a chair, trembling. James knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Do not worry. I will find a way to raise the money. I will not let him take Samuel." "But James, that amount of money," Sarah said desperately. "How can we possibly raise it in 2 weeks? We would have to sell the ranch, sell everything." "Then that is what I will do," James said firmly. "Sarah, I meant every word I said when I married you. Samuel is my son, and I will do whatever it takes to protect him. A ranch can be rebuilt, land can be acquired again, but I cannot replace my family." Over the next few days, James worked tirelessly to raise the money William demanded. He sold off a portion of his cattle herd at less than ideal prices because of the time pressure. He sold some of his best horses, animals he had spent years training. He even traveled to a neighboring town to borrow money from a bank, using the ranch as collateral. Sarah watched him sacrifice everything he had built, and her heart broke even as it swelled with love for him. "I am so sorry," she told him one night as they lay in bed, both exhausted. "This is all my fault. If I had never trusted William, if I had never gotten involved with him, none of this would be happening." "Stop," James said gently but firmly. "None of this is your fault. William is the one at fault here, not you. And I do not regret a single thing that has happened because it brought you and Samuel into my life. I would sell everything I own 1,000 times over if it meant keeping you both." On the 14th day, James rode into town with the money William had demanded. Sarah waited at home with Samuel, holding her baby close and praying that this nightmare would finally be over. Hours passed, and she grew increasingly anxious, imagining all the things that could go wrong. Finally, as the sun was setting, she heard a horse approaching. She rushed to the door and saw James riding up, his face grim but determined. He dismounted and came inside, holding a folded paper. "It is done," he said. William signed a legal document relinquishing all parental rights to Samuel in perpetuity. "He can never claim custody or make any demands on us again. I had a lawyer in town draw up the papers and witness the transaction. Samuel is legally my son now, in every way." Sarah burst into tears of relief, and James gathered her and Samuel into his arms, holding them close. "It is over," he murmured. "We are safe. Our family is safe." But the cost of that safety was high. Over the following months, James worked harder than ever to rebuild what he had sold. He took on extra work, hiring himself out to neighboring ranches to earn additional income. Sarah helped in every way she could, taking in sewing and selling eggs and butter in town. It was a difficult time, and there were moments when Sarah wondered if they would make it through. But their love for each other and for Samuel sustained them. On the hardest days when they were exhausted and worried about money, they would sit together in the evening with Samuel playing at their feet, and they would remind each other of what truly mattered. They had each other. They had their son. They had a home and a future. Everything else was just details. Slowly, over the course of a year, they began to recover financially. James rebuilt his cattle herd and acquired new horses to train and sell. Sarah's sewing business grew as women in town came to appreciate her skill with a needle. They were frugal and hard-working, and bit by bit, they regained the stability they had lost. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic toddler who adored his parents and loved life on the ranch. He followed James everywhere, trying to help with chores, even though he was too small to be of real assistance. James was endlessly patient with him, explaining how things worked and teaching him about the animals and the land. One evening, when Samuel was about 2 years old, he climbed into James's lap and patted his father's face with his small hands. "Papa," he said clearly. It was one of his first words, and both James and Sarah felt tears spring to their eyes. "Yes, buddy," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am your papa, and you are my son. I love you so much." Sarah watched them together and felt overwhelming gratitude for the man who had taken them in, who had chosen to love them both when he had no obligation to do so. James had given them everything, and she spent every day trying to be worthy of his love and sacrifice. As time passed, Sarah and James discussed having more children. Sarah wanted Samuel to have siblings, to grow up in a house full of love and laughter like James had. James agreed, saying he wanted a large family and that he could not wait to have more children with Sarah. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Grace, was born 2 years after Samuel. The birth was easier than Samuel's had been, and Emma was a calm, sweet baby who seemed content just to observe the world around her. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister and insisted on helping care for her, bringing her toys and singing to her in his childish voice. James loved Emma with the same fierce devotion he showed Samuel, and no one who saw them together would ever guess that Samuel was not biologically his. The two children looked somewhat similar, both having inherited Sarah's light coloring and delicate features, though Samuel had William's darker hair, while Emma had James's lighter brown. Life settled into a happy rhythm. The ranch prospered under James's careful management, and they were able to expand, purchasing additional land and increasing their herds. Sarah's sewing business continued to grow, and she became known in the community as a skilled seamstress. The initial scandal of their hasty marriage had long since faded, and they were now respected members of the community. When Samuel was 5 and Emma was 3, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy came as less of a surprise, and both she and James were delighted at the prospect of another child. James joked that they were well on their way to filling the house with children, and Sarah laughed, saying she hoped they would have at least 1 or 2 more after this one. Their third child, a son they named Daniel James, was born on a beautiful spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the Texas plains. He was a sturdy baby, with a loud cry and a strong will, and he kept both his parents and his older siblings entertained with his antics. With 3 young children, life on the ranch was chaotic but joyful. James built an addition onto the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen to accommodate their growing family. He also hired a young man named Tom Jenkins to help with the ranch work, giving James more time to spend with Sarah and the children. One evening, after all 3 children were finally asleep, James and Sarah sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. James had his arm around Sarah, and she leaned against him contentedly. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Taking me in that night, marrying me, taking on another man's child?" James turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Not for a single moment. Sarah, you and Samuel and Emma and Daniel are the best things that ever happened to me. I was lonely and directionless before you came into my life. Now I have purpose and joy every single day. How could I ever regret that?" "I just worry sometimes that you gave up too much," Sarah admitted. "You sold so much to pay off William, and you have worked so hard to rebuild." "And I would do it again in a heartbeat," James said firmly. "Everything I have built, everything I own, it is all meaningless without you and our children. You are my family, and family is worth any sacrifice." Sarah kissed him softly. "I love you so much, James Tucker. You are the best man I have ever known, and I thank God every day that he brought me to your door that night." "I thank him too," James said. James is pulling her closer. That was the night my real life began. As the years passed, the Tucker family continued to grow and thrive. Samuel grew into a responsible and kind young man who loved working on the ranch with his father. He was protective of his younger siblings and never questioned that James was his true father in every way that mattered. Sarah had told him the truth about his biological father when he was old enough to understand, explaining that while William had contributed to his creation, James was the man who had chosen to be his father and who loved him unconditionally. Samuel had listened carefully and then said simply, "Papa is my father. I do not care about the other man. Papa is the one who taught me to ride and to rope cattle and to be a good person. That is what matters." James had tears in his eyes when Sarah told him about the conversation, and he hugged Samuel tightly, telling him how proud he was to be his father. Emma grew into a bright, curious girl who loved books and learning. James made sure she had access to good books and encouraged her education, believing that girls deserved the same opportunities as boys. She helped her mother with the household work, but also insisted on learning ranch work from her father, becoming skilled at riding and caring for animals. Daniel was adventurous and spirited, always getting into mischief, but charming everyone with his infectious grin. He worshipped his older brother and followed Samuel around constantly, trying to do everything Samuel did even when he was too young. Sarah and James had 2 more children, twin girls they named Rebecca and Ruth, born when Samuel was 10. The twins were identical and delighted in confusing people about which was which. They were close from birth, always wanting to be together, and they brought even more joy and chaos to the Tucker household. The house was always full of noise and activity, with children running in and out, animals underfoot, and constant laughter and conversation. James thrived in the chaos, often sitting at the head of the dinner table with a child on each knee, and more gathered around, telling stories of his day and listening to theirs. Sarah would watch from the kitchen door as she prepared meals, her heart full to bursting with love for her husband and children. This was the life she had dreamed of, but never thought she would have. She had gone from desperate and alone, turned away from every door, to being the center of a large, loving family in a home filled with warmth and happiness. As Samuel approached adulthood, he began courting a young woman from a neighboring ranch, a kind girl named Margaret who fit perfectly into the Tucker family. James and Sarah watched with pride as Samuel conducted himself with honor and respect, treating Margaret with the same devotion James had always shown Sarah. When Samuel asked James for advice about marriage, James took him aside and spoke seriously. Marriage is about partnership and commitment. It is about choosing to love someone even on the days when it is hard. Your mother and I have had challenges over the years, but we have always faced them together. That is what makes a marriage strong. Choose a woman who shares your values, who you respect as much as you love, and who will stand beside you through whatever life brings. Then commit to her completely and never take her for granted. Samuel listened carefully and took the advice to heart. He married Margaret in a beautiful ceremony at the little church in Redemption, with his whole family gathered around him. Sarah cried happy tears as she watched her firstborn son pledge his life to the woman he loved, and James stood proud and tall, having walked Samuel down the aisle in the absence of any other father figure. A year later, Samuel and Margaret gave James and Sarah their first grandchild, a baby boy they named James Samuel Tucker. Sarah held her grandson in her arms and marveled at the fullness of her life. She had gone from being a desperate, unwed mother with nowhere to turn to being a grandmother surrounded by a loving family. Emma eventually left the ranch to attend a teaching college, determined to become an educator. James supported her ambitions wholeheartedly, proud of his daughter's intelligence and determination. She wrote home regularly, sharing her experiences and assuring her parents that she would return to Redemption to teach once she completed her education. Daniel took over more of the ranch work as James got older, proving himself to be a skilled cattleman with good instincts for business. The twins, Rebecca and Ruth, remained close and eventually opened a shop in town together, selling goods they made and items they imported from larger cities. Through it all, James and Sarah remained deeply in love, their bond only strengthening with time. They weathered hardships together, including droughts that threatened their cattle, illness that swept through the family, but fortunately spared them serious loss, and the inevitable challenges of raising 5 children to adulthood. On their 20th wedding anniversary, James surprised Sarah with a gift he had been working on for months. He led her outside to the barn, where he unveiled a beautiful carved wooden sign that read, "Tucker Family Ranch, founded 1878, built on love." "This ranch was nothing but dirt and dreams when I inherited it," James said, his arm around Sarah's waist. "But you made it a home. You made it a place worth building and worth fighting for. Everything good in my life started the night you knocked on my door. This sign is to remind us, and everyone who visits, that this ranch was built on the foundation of our love." Sarah cried happy tears and kissed her husband, still feeling the same flutter in her heart she had felt when he first proposed all those years ago. "I love you, James Tucker. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Thank you for choosing us." "Thank you for letting me," James said, pulling her close. "Thank you for trusting me with your heart and your child. Thank you for building this life with me." As they stood together, looking at their ranch and the life they had built, their children and grandchildren around them, Sarah thought back to that desperate night when she had arrived in Redemption with nowhere to go. She had been at the lowest point of her life, rejected and alone, And then James had appeared, offering shelter and kindness without judgment or conditions. He had not just saved her life that night. He had given her a future, a family, and a love that had sustained her through everything. He had taken another man's child and raised him as his own, never once making Samuel feel less than. He had worked himself to exhaustion to protect their family, and had never complained or resented the sacrifices he made. James Tucker was everything a man should be, everything a husband and father could aspire to. And Sarah spent every day grateful that she had stumbled to his door that autumn evening so many years ago. As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, James and Sarah walked hand in hand back to the house where their children were gathered for the anniversary celebration. Behind them, the sign James had carved swayed gently in the evening breeze, its message true and enduring. The Tucker family ranch had indeed been built on love, the kind of love that transformed lives and created legacies. It was a love born from an act of compassion on a desperate night, nurtured through years of partnership and commitment, and strengthened by facing life's challenges together. And as James held the door open for Sarah, his eyes full of the same love and devotion he had shown her from the very beginning, she knew with absolute certainty that she was home. Not just in a physical place, but in the heart of a man who had chosen her when she had nothing to offer but herself, who had loved her child as his own, and who had built a beautiful life with her that exceeded every dream she had ever dared to dream. That night, as they celebrated with their family around them, Sarah raised her glass in a toast. "To James," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "The man who said I could stay in his home that night, and who made it our home forever. To the love of my life, the father of my children, and the best man I have ever known. Thank you for everything." James smiled, his eyes suspiciously bright, and raised his own glass. "To Sarah, who brought love and purpose into my life. To our children, who are our greatest joy. And to family, which is the greatest blessing anyone can receive." Everyone raised their glasses and echoed the sentiment, and the house rang with laughter and love. Outside, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, watching over the Tucker Ranch where a family built on love, forgiveness, and second chances continued to thrive and grow, a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring strength of true love. The years that followed brought their share of both joys and sorrows, as life always does. When James was in his mid-50s, he suffered a serious injury while breaking a particularly spirited horse. The animal had thrown him, and he landed badly, breaking several ribs and his left arm. Sarah nursed him back to health with patient devotion, just as he had cared for her through 5 pregnancies and various illnesses over the years. During his recovery, James was forced to slow down and let Daniel and Samuel take on more of the ranch work, something that frustrated him but also filled him with pride as he watched his sons manage everything competently. "I built something that will last," he told Sarah one evening as they sat on the porch, his arm still in a sling but healing well. "The ranch will continue long after I am gone because our sons know how to run it, and they love it as much as I do." "You built more than a ranch," Sarah said, taking his good hand in hers. "You built a family and a legacy. Our children are good people because of the example you set for them. They know what it means to work hard, to treat others with kindness, and to value family above everything else. That is your real legacy, James." As they moved into their later years, James and Sarah took great joy in their grandchildren. Samuel and Margaret had 3 more children after little James, and each of the other children eventually married and started families of their own. The Tucker family gatherings became legendary in Redemption, with the house and yard full of children and grandchildren. Sometimes 20 or 30 people all gathered together for Sunday dinner or holiday celebrations. Emma returned from teaching college and established a school in Redemption, where she educated children for decades with the same passion and dedication her father had shown in running his ranch. She never married, saying she was married to her profession, but she loved her nieces and nephews fiercely and was everyone's favorite aunt. Daniel married a woman named Catherine, who loved ranch life as much as he did, and they took over the day-to-day running of the Tucker Ranch when James finally decided it was time to fully retire. James and Sarah moved into a smaller house on the property, built by their sons and sons-in-law as a gift, where they could live comfortably without the burden of maintaining the larger home. Rebecca and Ruth's shop in town became one of the most successful businesses in Redemption. The twins had a keen eye for what people wanted and needed, and they worked together seamlessly, finishing each other's sentences and seeming to read each other's minds. They both married brothers from a ranching family, creating an even more intricate web of the family connections. On Samuel's 40th birthday, he approached James with a request. "Papa, I want to tell you something. I am changing my name legally, not my last name, of course. That will always be Tucker. But I want to add your name as my middle name. So instead of Samuel Morrison Tucker, I will be Samuel James Tucker. Would that be all right with you?" James was overcome with emotion. Samuel was a man in his prime now, with children of his own, successful and respected in the community. But in that moment, James saw the little boy he had held in his arms on the day of his birth, the child he had claimed as his own son. "Samuel, you do not have to do that," James said, his voice rough. "I know I do not have to," Samuel said. "I want to. You are my father in every way that matters. You raised me, you loved me, you taught me everything I know about being a man and a father. I want to carry your name as part of mine officially. I should have done it years ago." James embraced his son, both of them with tears streaming down their faces. "I am so proud of you," James said. "I have been proud to be your father every single day of your life. And I have been proud to be your son," Samuel replied. Sarah witnessed this exchange from the doorway, her own tears flowing freely. This moment, perhaps more than any other, validated the choice James had made 40 years earlier to take in a desperate pregnant woman and claim her child as his own. The love between James and Samuel was real and deep and unbreakable, transcending biology and proving that family was about choice and commitment, not just blood. As James and Sarah entered their 70s, they slowed down considerably but remained active and engaged with their family. They attended every grandchild's important event, from school performances to weddings to the births of great-grandchildren. James loved to sit on the porch of their small house, watching the ranch bustle with activity under Daniel's management, often with a great-grandchild on his knee listening to his stories. Sarah took up quilting in her later years, creating beautiful quilts for each of her children, grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. Each quilt was unique, designed specifically for the recipient, and they became treasured family heirlooms. She would sit in her rocking chair by the window, her fingers still nimble despite her age, stitching together pieces of fabric into works of art, while James read aloud to her from books or newspapers. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire Tucker family gathered for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren came from all over Texas and beyond, filling the main ranch house and spilling out into the yard. There must have been 60 people there, all descended from or connected to James and Sarah. A photographer was hired to take a formal family portrait. And as everyone assembled, struggling to fit into the frame, Sarah looked around at the sea of faces and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 50 years ago, she had been alone and desperate. Now she was surrounded by family, by people who existed because she and James had found each other and built a life together. During the celebration, each of the 5 Tucker children stood and spoke about their parents. Samuel went first, his voice strong and clear despite his emotion. "My father taught me what it means to be a man of honor," Samuel said, looking directly at James. He could have turned his back on a pregnant woman who meant nothing to him. Instead, he opened his home and his heart. He gave me his name and his love, and he never once made me feel like I was anything other than his beloved son. Everything I am, every good thing I have done in my life, I owe to his example. Papa, I love you, and I am grateful every day that you chose to be my father. Emma spoke next, talking about how James had encouraged her education and supported her dreams, even when others thought it inappropriate for a woman to pursue teaching. Daniel shared stories of working alongside his father, learning not just about ranching, but about integrity and hard work. Rebecca and Ruth spoke together, as they did everything, about how their father had taught them they could be anything they wanted to be. Then it was Sarah's turn to speak. She stood, her hair now completely white and her face lined with age, but her eyes still bright with intelligence and love. 50 years ago, I came to redemption with nothing but the clothes on my back and a baby in my belly. I was turned away from every door until I reached James's fence. He could have done the same. No one would have blamed him, but he did not. He offered me shelter that first night, and then he offered me his heart and his life. He loved my son as his own, and together we built this amazing family. Every person in this room exists because James Tucker was kind to a stranger, because he chose compassion over judgment, love over fear. James, you are my heart, my home, and my hero. I love you more today than I did 50 years ago, and I will love you for whatever time we have left and beyond. There was not a dry eye in the room as Sarah sat back down, and James pulled her close, kissing her forehead tenderly. Best 50 years of my life, he whispered. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and endless food. As the evening wound down, James and Sarah slipped away from the crowd, walking hand in hand to a small hill that overlooked the ranch. They stood together in the moonlight, looking down at their land and the house full of their family. We did well, did we not? James said quietly. We did, Sarah agreed. Better than I ever dreamed possible. I have no regrets, James said. Not a single one. Every moment of our life together has been a gift. Even the hard times? Sarah asked with a gentle smile. Especially the hard times, James confirmed. They made us stronger. They taught us what really matters. And they gave us appreciation for all the good times. They stood there for a long while, just being together as they had been for 50 years, comfortable in each other's presence and grateful for the love they shared. James passed away peacefully 3 years later, at the age of 76. He went to sleep one night holding Sarah's hand and simply did not wake up. The doctor said it was his heart, worn out after a long life of hard work and deep feeling. Sarah was devastated but also grateful that he had gone peacefully, without suffering, and that she had been beside him at the end, as he had been beside her through everything. The funeral was one of the largest Redemption had ever seen. James had been respected and loved in the community, known for his fairness, generosity, and unwavering principles. Person after person stood to share stories of how James had helped them or touched their lives in some way. But it was Samuel who gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke about the man who had been his father in every way that mattered. James Tucker was not a perfect man, but he was a good man, a great man. He showed me, and everyone who knew him, what it means to live with integrity and compassion. He taught me that family is not just about blood, but about choice and commitment. He chose me before I was even born, and he loved me every day of my life. I will miss him terribly, but I will honor his memory by trying to be the kind of man he was, the kind of father he was to me. Rest in peace, Papa. You earned it. Sarah lived for 7 more years after James's death. They were difficult years, lonely without her beloved husband, but she was sustained by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, who made sure she was never truly alone. She spent her days surrounded by family, telling stories about James and their life together, making sure the younger generations understood what their grandfather had been like and what he had meant. She passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 80, and the family chose to bury her next to James in the cemetery overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone was simple but perfect. James Tucker, 1852 to 1928, and Sarah Morrison, Tucker, 1854 to 1931. Together they built a legacy of love. At Sarah's funeral, Samuel, now in his 50s and a grandfather himself, stood before the gathered family one more time. My mother and father built something extraordinary, he said. Not just this ranch, though that is impressive. Not just this large family, though that is a blessing. They built a life based on love, forgiveness, and second chances. My mother arrived here with nothing, and my father gave her everything. Together, they showed us all what really matters in life. Family, love, kindness. These are the things that last. These are the things that matter. After the funeral, the entire Tucker family gathered at the main ranch house, now run by Samuel's oldest son. They shared memories and stories, laughed and cried together, and celebrated the lives of James and Sarah Tucker. As the evening drew to a close, Samuel found himself standing on the porch where his father had once stood, looking out over the ranch. His own children and grandchildren were around him, and he felt the weight of the legacy his parents had built. "Grandpa, tell us the story again," one of his young grandchildren asked, tugging on his hand. "Tell us how great-grandpa and great-grandma met." Samuel smiled and picked up the child, settling into the rocking chair that had been his father's. The family gathered around as he began the story they had all heard many times, but never tired of hearing. Once upon a time, on a cold autumn night in 1878, a desperate young woman came to the town of Redemption, seeking shelter. She was pregnant and alone, and every door she knocked on was slammed in her face. She had almost given up hope, when she came to a small ranch on the edge of town. The owner, a young cowboy named James Tucker, could have turned her away like everyone else, but he did not. He said, "She will stay in my home tonight." And that one act of kindness changed everything. It gave my mother hope. It gave me a father. And it created this family that you are all part of. Never forget that we all exist because one man chose compassion over judgment, because he saw a person in need and helped without expecting anything in return. That is the legacy of James and Sarah Tucker. That is who we are as a family, and that is what we should always strive to be. The children listened with rapt attention, and the adults nodded, remembering and renewing their commitment to the values their parents and grandparents had instilled in them. The Tucker family continued to thrive for generations, always remembering the story of how it all began. The ranch remained in the family, passed down from generation to generation, each one adding to it and building upon the foundation James and Sarah had laid. The story of the desperate woman denied shelter, and the cowboy who took her in became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations, a reminder of where they came from and what they stood for. In the town of Redemption, the Tucker name became synonymous with integrity, hard work, and compassion. When someone needed help, people would say, "That is what a Tucker would do," and then offer assistance. The family's legacy extended far beyond their own bloodline, influencing the entire community to be more kind, more generous, more willing to give people second chances. And in that small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, James and Sarah Tucker rested side by side, their stone weathering slowly over the years, but their legacy growing stronger with each passing generation. They had started with nothing but love and determination, and they had built something that would last forever. A family bound not just by blood, but by shared values and shared memories. A ranch that prospered not just financially, but spiritually, serving as a refuge and a home for all who needed it. And a love story that proved that sometimes the greatest loves begin with a simple act of kindness, a choice to help someone in need, and a decision to build a life together based on mutual respect, devotion, and unwavering commitment. The story of James and Sarah Tucker, of how she was denied shelter, and he said she would stay in his home that night, became more than just a family legend. It became a testament to the transformative power of compassion, the enduring strength of true love, and the beautiful truth that family is built not just through biology, but through choice, commitment, and unconditional love. And so, the legacy continued, generation after generation, each one carrying forward the values James and Sarah had lived by, each one telling the story to their children and grandchildren, making sure that no one ever forgot where they came from and what truly mattered in life. The Tucker family stood as living proof that one moment of kindness, one decision to help instead of turn away, could change the course of countless lives and create a legacy that would endure for generations. In the end, James and Sarah Tucker's greatest achievement was not the ranch they built or the wealth they accumulated. It was the family they created, the love they shared, and the example they set for all who came after them. They showed the world that everyone deserves kindness, that second chances can lead to beautiful outcomes, and that true love can conquer any obstacle when two people are committed to building a life together. Their story lived on, a beacon of hope and inspiration, reminding everyone who heard it that sometimes all it takes to change a life is opening your door and your heart to someone in need, and that the most extraordinary love stories often begin in the most unexpected ways, with a simple act of compassion on a desperate night.